Answer these questions to yourself. Do you have more fat around your belly than you think is healthy? Do you have high blood pressure? Do you have high levels of blood triglycerides? Do you have patches of darker skin or small bumps of skin around your neck, armpits, or elsewhere? Do you have a family member with type 2 diabetes? For women, have you had gestational diabetes or PCOS? For men, do you have low testosterone? If you answered yes to 2 or more of these questions, you're likely insulin resistant. Just as our lifestyle is a cause of so many of our chronic diseases, it can also be the cure. At this point, you're expecting me to give you a clear, simple solution. And here it is. We must control insulin to control metabolic health. There are myriad more and less effective methods to control insulin, but all of them revolve around the food we eat. These methods vary in proportion of fat, carbohydrate, and protein, the key macronutrients of everything we eat, as well as the frequency of eating. Unfortunately, while the myriad methods differ in efficacy, the voices promoting each of them all insist they know what's best. In fact, I think I know what's best to control insulin and metabolic health as well. And despite my reluctance, I am compelled to add my voice to the confusing chorus. A scientifically sound strategy to control insulin is based on adjusting macronutrients to favor sources of energy that have the smallest effect on insulin. When carbohydrate is consumed in the form of pure glucose, very similar to eating a refined starch or sugar, insulin dramatically increases to well above 10 times over normal and, depending on the person, can remain elevated for several hours. Though this can vary, when a person eats pure protein, insulin will usually increase slightly over normal levels for a time. Remarkably, fat consumption, in contrast, has no effect on insulin. Based on these data and dozens of related clinical studies, 3 conclusions have become pillars for me. 1. We need to control carbohydrates. I'm not advocating the avoidance of an entire group of macronutrients. After all, carbohydrates include a remarkable range of foods. Rather, be smart about your selection of starches and take a little time to learn how they affect insulin. Lest that seem onerous, much of this is intuitive. Most fruits and vegetables, as you might guess, have a fairly small effect on insulin, while college student staples such as bread, cereal, and potato chips have a pronounced effect. If the carbohydrate comes in a bag or a box with a barcode, it's likely one to be careful with. Of course, sugar, in its many forms and clever names, is uniquely terrible. This includes fruit juice and smoothies. If you want to control insulin and enjoy fruit, eat it. Don't drink it. 2. We should prioritize protein. A case has recently been made in scientific literature that recommendations of dietary protein are insufficient for most people to maintain and promote muscle and bone mass, which is critical for maintaining good health and insulin sensitivity throughout life. Depending on age and activity, an optimal level of dietary protein is around 1 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. Importantly, this need for dietary protein increases with age. As we get older, we need more protein. If you avoid protein because of something you saw in a book or documentary, I hope you'll take the time to read their scientific references. 3, we need to stop fearing fat. We have a strong cultural aversion to dietary fat. In fact, by many estimates, we eat a smaller portion of our diets from fat now than ever before. The history behind the reasons for our eschewing fat is as fascinating as it is unfortunate. Regardless, dietary fat is a remarkable energy source. Because it has no effect on insulin on its own, in a way, it has the ability to feed our bodies, but not our fat, providing a new version of an old adage, we aren't what we eat. I understand that some of my conclusions may be hard to hear. To this end, I want to encourage you to follow the process I used to come to these conclusions with conviction. First, I recommend you find out for yourself. If we believe such a process is sufficient, even necessary, to establish our own personal faith, I submit it should be part of the process of finding truth within the realm of lifestyle and health. As a missionary preaching the gospel in Russia 20 years ago, I never told anyone to just believe me. Yet this is standard practice for many when it comes to lifestyle and health. Just as one seeking a testimony of the Book of Mormon should read the scriptures, a person that is seeking to learn the truth of the most effective lifestyle changes to control insulin and health should search the scientific scriptures, that is, published research articles. Access to these resources is incredible, and by learning how to effectively search and navigate websites like Google Scholar and PubMed, anyone can quickly find peer-reviewed human clinical studies and learn, if only by reading the abstracts. As you do this, be mindful of the experimental model used in the studies you find and whether the results indicate causation or correlation. With this distinction, you'll be better prepared to make informed conclusions. Throughout this exploratory stage, I hope you'll have an open mind to allow data, not dogma, to dictate your decisions. For the second part of this process, I recommend you test what you learn. When you think you've found sufficient evidence to support an ideal lifestyle plan to fight insulin resistance and its related complications, try it for a month. Keep in mind that the changes you make will ideally be sufficiently practical to follow indefinitely. At this point, I feel compelled to address a common attempt at improving health. Let's imagine I've invited each of you to join me for a dinner where the world's greatest chefs have prepared the most magnificent meals. Naturally, you're excited to come indulge and determined to come hungry. What would you do to ensure you came to my dinner as hungry as possible? I suspect you would settle on two strategies. You would likely eat less for some period of time prior, skipping meals and generally eating very little, and you would likely increase your physical activity, deliberately exercising more or harder for some time in the days leading up to the dinner. This would work. You would come very hungry. But do these two strategies seem familiar? Eat less, exercise more. This has been our best metabolic advice for half of a century. While this advice may have some utility, especially if you know you're eating too much, has it really helped? Are we better? Can you see why it might not work in the long run? By basing a lifestyle plan on eating less and exercising more, we are ensuring an almost constant battle against hunger, and hunger usually wins. The third and final part of the process you can undertake to identify a lifestyle change to better control insulin is to be patient and endure the initial discomfort that comes with any change. We should be wary of what others tell us is best. A good example of this can be seen in the dietary recommendations by a prominent diabetes association within the United States. In 1987, Dr. Gerald Reaven, perhaps the most famous diabetes scientist, if such a thing is possible, conducted a clinical trial among type 2 diabetics to test the efficacy of the association's recommended diet. In his words, this diet focused on low-fat, high-carbohydrate foods containing moderate amounts of sugar. Within just 2 weeks, the type 2 diabetics placed on the recommended diet got demonstrably worse. Glucose and insulin climbed, while blood triglycerides and cholesterol spiked. Dr. Reaven accurately concluded that the recommended diet caused deleterious metabolic effects. As a life scientist at BYU, I enjoy being able to discuss the body's role as a temporal tool that helps us build an eternity. After all, there are eternal lessons best learned in a physical, even mortal body. Our bodies give us a certain degree of power, which, while enabling us to exert an influence on the world, are very often a focus of temptation. We are tempted to misuse the power these bodies provide us. I submit that a portion of our eventual judgment will be based on how we use the limited power these bodies give us, and when found responsible with such power, we will show our capability to receive greater power. Additionally, some eternal lessons may have pedestrian origins, but be nevertheless relevant. For example, the discipline required to deny oneself a late-night sugary snack may foster a similar resolve to resist the temptation to anger or various forms of spiritual self-abuse. Of course, none of this is to say there will be a measuring tape at the pearly gates. We will certainly not be judged by our body size, but perhaps partly by how we treated our bodies.